He was a wanted criminal and fed him a nasty patty. He died. What is the most fucked up thing that happened in a children's TV show? Henry the Tank Engine was bricked up inside an abandoned tunnel for having anxiety while Ringo Starr mocked him. There was a story from Chicago's golden age of children's television, at WGN in the 1950s. A chimpanzee was the sidekick to a host and would do interstitials to Three Stooges shorts. One time they had a guest who had a parakeet that could perform various tricks. Here's the quote from the book. The bird, perched on the woman's hand, went through a series of routines as Grayson, the host, and Chatter, the chimpanzee, looked on. In the middle of the act, Chatter suddenly grabbed the bird, bit its head off, and, without missing a beat, placed the carcass back on the shocked woman's hand. As his guest crumpled to the floor, a stunned Grayson stared at his partner and the station cut quickly to a commercial. That's pretty fucked up. Not really as messed up as a lot of these, but still creepy. That episode of Tom and Jerry where Tom gets depressed and sits on a railroad track, waiting for a train to come. Then Jerry comes to join him sitting down. The episode cuts to black and ends, and it never mentions it after that. Strange. I got another one. T&J episode in which Tom dies and goes to heaven, but he is not allowed in cause he's been an asshole to Jerry. He is given a time limit for Jerry to forgive him or he will go to hell. While he is up in heaven, trying to get in, a dripping wet sack of something comes rolling in. It unties and out come a bunch of kittens, straight on through the pearly gates. I know I saw it as a kid and it didn't even register with me. As an adult, my jaw dropped because, holy shit, what the actual fuck, man. Invader Zim was fucked, too. I had a love/hate relationship with that show as a kid. It freaked me out but I still watched it. That episode where he harvests all the other kids' organs into his own body to pass off as more human was particularly disturbing. In the UK, The Animals of Farthing Wood. Graphic, gruesome death was a regular feature. It included Mr. and Mrs. Hedgehog getting run over, whatever you do, dearest, don't curl up squish. Mr. Pheasant is shot dead as he stares in horror at his dead wife, shot earlier, who has been cooked and roasted. Sinuous the adder is choked to death by rats. The baby mice are impaled on thorns by a shrike. There were 24 deaths across 39 episodes, every one of them a major character. The Animals of Farthing Wood. I just looked up the show on YouTube and found season 1. In the first episode, we follow the harrowing narrative of an old man frog who tries to jump back to his pond while dodging giant machine digger claws from the humans that have begun to fill in the local pond, which all the nearby animals depend on for water. The frog is scooped up by a claw and dumped and buried for dead in a dirt pile. I just found my next self-isolation binge show. There are way worse things in SpongeBob episodes. There's an episode where they have like 2 to 3 Squidward suicide jokes, one where he has a rope and chair, another where he sticks his head in the oven. It's called Are You Happy Now, if you want to watch. Plankton trying to get run over and die because Mr. Krabs was torturing him by scaring him dressed as Pearl the Whale. There are more disturbing things, but these are a few examples. I remember that episode. I was never a huge fan of SpongeBob SquarePants but would watch with my older sis when she watched. A quick summary of the episode, from what I remember cause it's been a while since I last saw that episode, they thought he was a wanted criminal and fed him a nasty patty. He died. Obviously. So they buried him. Either the series finale of Alf in which Alf is captured by the government presumably to be experimented on or the series finale of Dinosaurs in which the entire civilization is destroyed. I actually watched some of this with my kid not long ago. Being stuck at home, we watched some more, including the finale. The episode ends with them stuck at home not sure of what's to come, but the dad reassuring the family it would be fine. The last line was something like dinosaurs have been on this earth for 150 million years. It's not like we're going to just disappear before staring longingly at uncertainty as the credits roll. Made the wife and I shoot each other an uneasy glance, considering current circumstances. Honestly, watch at your own risk. They sexualized young Ariana Grande beyond belief. Fuck Dan Schneider. How the fuck Nickelodeon show director Dan Schneider didn't go down with Harvey Weinstein is beyond me. There are a handful of people defending this video that can be found at the bottom of this thread. I watched all of iCarly and Victorious and even some of Cat and Sam, My daughter grew up watching these. At the time I thought some of the jokes were too adult, but I guess I never really paid it much attention. But looking back, there was an episode where Carly was taking a bath and got her toe stuck in the faucet when she had a date. The kid had to come to the bathroom where she had her toe stuck. The whole thing was so bizarre. Those poor kids, I can't imagine the fucked up shit he did behind the scenes if this is what he got away with on air. There's this Hey Arnold episode called The Ghost Bride, and the story is basically that this lady was madly in love with her fiancé but was stood up at the altar because he had fallen in love with her sister and married her the very next day. So the lady goes berserk and puts on her wedding dress, gets an axe from her basement, walks to the newlywed couple's home, kills them both in their beds, and when the cops come, she's rocking back and forth in a rocking chair next to the bodies, throwing rice on them and humming the wedding march. To finish it all off, she immediately jumps out of the window and kills herself. There is an episode of Scooby-Doo, one of the ones with Scooby, Shaggy, and Scrappy only, where they are being chased around a pyramid by a mummy and they beat him by unraveling him. But then when they are leaving they turn round and footsteps are following them in the sand. They run away, footsteps return to the pyramid, and then the episode ends. Only example in classic Scooby, I think, where the monster was real. Fair to say I've been scared of mummies ever since I'm in my 20s. Movie rather than TV show, but if I think of, that's really dark for kids, my mind always jumps to Clayton's death at the end of Tarzan. Dude accidentally hanging himself with a vine is pretty dark. I mean, Clayton was also basically an allegory for slavery and genocide with his obsession with killing rare specimens and the way he caged up all Tarzan's family and put them on boats to be shipped back to England. So yeah, dark end to a dark story. I remember that episode of the Magic School Bus when that ginger dude took off his helmet in space after being told not to and his dome turned to ice or something like that. It spooked me as a kid. The one where his sister or cousin or something made an appearance. Basically, the plot is Arnold's relative visits the school and is skeptical about Mrs. Frizzle. They go to space, and the relative is collecting rocks to show to her class. She went to a different school. Once they go to all the planets, her rocks are so heavy that the bus can't go. The relative refuses to get rid of any rocks. Arnold gets fed up with it and takes off his helmet to convince her to go home. The worst part? Mrs. Frizzle doesn't do a thing. The Looney Tunes where the bulldog, I think his name is Caesar or Romeo anyway, he wants to keep a kitten, his owner is already mad so he tried to hide kitten, stuff happens and he ends up believing the kitten was baked into cookies and the owner gives him a cat-shaped cookie and he's crying puddles of tears and grabs the cookie pretending it's the kitty, completely traumatized. There was a very special anti-drug episode of the 80s cartoon Brave Star. In this episode, a couple of kids get hooked on a new drug. At the end of the episode, one of the kids died from an overdose. 30 plus years later, and I'm not sure how many children's shows even today would kill a kid. Captain Planet did the same thing. A drug called Bliss that makes the user happy and all their problems go away, but also makes them reckless and not fear injury or death, and is extremely addictive. Linka's cousin gets addicted and then manages to get her hooked, but she quits after he dies of an overdose. Well, the premise to Avatar: The Last Airbender is a literal genocide of the protagonist's entire people. Korra was really fucked up. A whole ass terrorist attack at a professional sports arena was too damn real. Also, Korra getting her bending taken away from Amon was really creepy. The dark lighting / setting, forcing her against her will, and her reaction afterward made it feel like more than taking her bending away. That episode of Thomas the Tank Engine when Thomas visits the scrap heap where all the dead / dying trains are, I remember watching it as a kid and not even thinking about how Thomas is basically surrounded by a bunch of corpses or people left to die. That episode of Teen Titans where we learn about Raven's prophecy has some very repay undertones to it. He just steadily burned more and more of her clothes off. Paraphrased, no matter how you fight or scream, there is nothing you can do to stop it. Oh, and there was that whole porn version. In the original Powerpuff Girls there was this episode called Butter Crush that I never really forgot. Buttercup sort of got into a relationship with the leader of the Gone Green gang, but the leader kept on taking advantage of her and she had no idea. It gets to the point where she ditches her sisters to hang out with him, but he just keeps on using her. Of course, in the end, she realized what was going on and beat him up, though. I guess it really wasn't that dark or anything, but it always made me feel sick inside when I saw it. Maybe it was partly about the age difference, But it was the first time I saw a relationship like that in a cartoon. All of TFTM was pretty much a WTF thing. Kids had gone through 2 seasons of the show with these guys, and established media had made the Autobots pretty much invincible. There was an entire episode where Prime is dismembered, for Christ's sake. And then all of a sudden the movie comes along and kills off a 1/3 of the cast in the opening act. It pissed parents off, who wrote and called to Hasbro in droves. This ultimately led to the decision to air the G.I. Joe movie as a television film and to save Duke, who was originally slated to die. The decision to bring Prime back to the cartoon was made in '87, but only 5 episodes featuring Prime would air before the American conclusion of the series. Speaking from personal experience, it was when the Watergate hearings replaced my usual after-school helping of Batman. And it went on for months. I remember sitting on the floor in front of the TV watching all those old men arguing and acting angry. I could not figure out what they were doing that was more important than my Batman fix. I'm sure I asked my mom every day when they would be done, but I clearly remember her answering me at least once that it would probably be months. SMH. Did you ever read Thomas the Tank Engine as a kid? I keep seeing this and I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. The train wasn't bricked up in a tunnel. He went into the tunnel and refused to go out and work or interact with the world because he was vain and didn't want to tarnish his nice new coat of paint. They tried to coax him out, but when he refused they walled him up for safekeeping. It's what he wanted and chose. They came back when they had a job that only he could do and asked him again, and when he agreed to come out of the tunnel he discovers that while in the tunnel he is rusted and tarnished anyways from lack of maintenance. It's not a confusing story. It's literally for children. I've read a couple of these so far, and the chimp one is probably the top contender, despite Jimmy Savile being mentioned, which doesn't count since his antics weren't on television. But I've got a good one. In the show, Powerpuff Girls, one of the writers wrote himself onto the show to become, I think, Blossom's boyfriend, and they aired it. I remember watching the episode when it originally aired and was thinking, WTF, is this episode so weird? And then came across that breakdown you linked a few years later. Was a total, aha moment for me. Not exactly on the children's show itself, but about 20 years ago during a midday episode of the Spider-Man cartoon, the news broke in to cover a live high-speed chase that ended in a standoff on a popular Los Angeles freeway. The suspect abruptly blew the top of his own head off with a rifle on live television. The top of his head literally flapped open like a can of SpaghettiOs. A camera caught everything. I assure you, kids watching that were never the same. As a child I remember being fairly traumatized over a series called David the Gnome where he and his wife reach 400 and die together in the finale. They actually become cherry trees intertwined together in the next plane. I remember trying to explain to my mother why I was crying so hard watching the TV, but she didn't get it. Adventure Time also had some seriously existential episodes as well. One that always sticks out to me is the one where Finn gets cursed inside of a dungeon, and every single time he opens his eyes he is transported right back to where the curse first started. He escapes the dungeon over and over, living months, maybe even years, as a blind kid before eventually giving in and opening his eyes only to be transported back in time to the beginning of the dungeon in the exact same manner. Jake often never believes Finn is cursed, and forces Finn's eyes open, resetting everything over and over like Groundhog Day. He eventually breaks the curse by abandoning Jake and wandering blind and aimlessly across the world, for God knows how long, until he happens upon the dungeon's twin. When he finally exits the twin dungeon, he opens his eyes to Jake greeting him as if time never looped in the first place. I freaking love Adventure Time. It was pretty fucked up when Invader Zim had a plan to harvest the organs of children to make himself seem human. In the end, Zim was an enormous mass of stolen organs while other kids were walking around with soda cans instead of lungs. Great show. Too many episodes of Hey Arnold. Like finding out Stoop Kid stayed on his stoop because he was abandoned there and was homeless but hopelessly waiting for someone to come back for him. How Monkey Man was mentally ill and also homeless. That one where you learn Grandpa and his sister had a lifelong rift because the only good thing in their life as children, their puppy, got killed by a car in front of them and they each blamed the other. How Lila and her dad are squatters to keep from being homeless. How the kids on the show routinely get mugged. Or how Mr. Yun hates Christmas because that's the anniversary of the day he handed his baby daughter off to an American soldier to get her out of the war zone because he wasn't sure they'd survive. Then spent the rest of his life working to immigrate to America to try and find her, only having the name of the city to work from, and ended up missing her whole childhood because he was too poor to hire a private investigator. Until Helga literally sold the shoes off her feet to hire one to make Arnold happy. Oh, and how Helga is obsessed with Arnold because she grew up neglected by an alcoholic mother and aggressive narcissistic father who only cared about her older sister, and Arnold was literally the first person in her entire life to show her any kindness. When, as a preschooler, he offered to share his umbrella because her parents forgot to take her to her first day of preschool and she had to walk in the rain, by herself, with no coat, as a 4-year-old in what we can only assume is New York City. So yeah, that show was supremely jacked up. Thank you for watching Reddit Space. Please subscribe if you love these Reddit stories.